Welcome to Career Cravings with your hosts, Dev Ramcharan and Megan Reed. If you crave a better and more satisfying career, this show is for you. We're broadcasting live on Bold Radio Station every week. Now, here are your hosts, Dev and Megan.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Career Cravings. This is Megan Reed, and I'm here with my co-host, Dev Ramcharan. So tonight, as always, we've got an interesting guest here to speak with us. And while we will be doing some digging into her career cravings, we're also going to speak with her about some of the work that she's done because it'll be really helpful for a number of you out there listening tonight. So am I piquing your curiosity? Tonight, we're going to be talking about maternity leaves, the impact of taking one, some of the perceived impacts of taking one, and how you can more successfully navigate your maternity leave. Our guest is actually a friend and a colleague of mine at Canada Career Counseling, and she is one of Canada's leading experts around maternity leaves. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Avra Davidoff to the show. So welcome, Avra. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your career?
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan and Deb, for having me. I guess I'll start with the most recent and then I'll go back a little bit. I'm a registered psychologist in the province of Alberta with a master's in counseling psychology with a career counseling specialization. Certainly practicing in the area of career development, as you mentioned, also leadership development, things like that. But I suppose my path to where I am right now wasn't the most linear, so to speak, and certainly probably best summarized by that planned happenstance. So previous to landing in career development, I was actually in the field of mental health. And had started my master's with the intent of pursuing that path on into mental health. And while I had started my master's, my situation had taken a turn and met a person, as many people do, and end up moving for that person, although it took me overseas to New Zealand. And while I was there, I was on a working holiday visa, and I took a job at a charity that supported people with experience of mental illness in terms of employment. However, the reason why I took it was because of the focus on mental health. And while I was there, I began to really notice, an interest in career development, and enjoyed that part of the job a little bit more. And when I was looking more into my master's, I realized that my program had a specialization in career development, and that was it. The rest is history. And so that's kind of how I ended up where I am today.
And so tell us a bit about how the maternity leave fits into this whole episode, because I know the backstory and I know around the project, the research, and everything that's come from it around maternity leaves in Canada. But tell us a bit, I guess, about how you decided to do this project and a bit about the project, just so our listeners have that understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I had certainly been observing just in the practice that, where I had been seeing clients where, I've been noticing moms and dads actually coming in with issues related to being off after childcare and, thinking that their career was impacted or they couldn't go back to what it was that they were going to, what they were doing previously. And certainly seeing colleagues kind of go through the same thing. But I think what was most impactful was my own experience, to be honest. So my first maternity leave, I kind of didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing, and I'm a bit of an information junkie and like to research things. So I was looking for some type of information or some type of resource to kind of walk me through this process from a career perspective, because that was still an important part for me in my own journey, and knowing that I wanted to continue in my career. I didn't know what it was going to look like and what the timeline was going to look like. I just knew it was important to me. And I really couldn't find the information that I was looking for. And so really, in that sense, the project was born. No pun there, right? and I remember having, quite a difficult time with my first maternity leave in terms of navigating what I was supposed to be doing in that year off with my employer. And I had a great relationship actually with my employer, and my manager, for all intents and purposes, was really quite supportive about everything. But 2 weeks before I was supposed to return, the negotiations sort of went a little bit sideways. And I ended up quitting and of course, coming over to Canada Career Counseling. And it kind of left me feeling like, how did it get to this position? Especially when I resigned, the response was, well, you're one of our most experienced staff, so that's really unfortunate. And yeah, that was my immediate thought is, well, then how did we get to this spot? And, what could I have done differently? What could my manager have done differently? What can the organization that employed me as a whole have done differently? And again, I just really couldn't find, what I was looking for in terms of guiding that process.
And so that is so telling to me that you, as a career psychologist, someone who's specializing, and maybe not at that first maternity leave, but specializing in career counseling and that psychological field, that you had trouble navigating your own maternity leave. And when I put that on a national or international platform, half the people in the world are women. And, I don't know the statistics around how many women have children or how many working women have children, but that number has got to be astronomical. And if you've had difficulty navigating maternity leaves, it means so many women out there are in the same boat as you. So in terms of the research, Avra, and the work that you did, can you tell us a little bit about what the research was, what you were looking for, those sorts of things?
Yeah, so we really wanted to understand the impact of taking a maternity leave on a women's career development. But more than that, we also wanted to understand the two different perspectives. So really wanting to understand both the employee as well as the employer. And we felt that was really important because of any information that we did find around maternity leave, it was largely the employee perspective. Even if it was around applying for EI or postpartum depression or breastfeeding, work-life balance, those types of things, it was largely from the employee perspective. But we really felt that in order for this transition to be more successful, we really need to understand, well, what is the employer perspective? And, how does it impact the employer? Because we really needed to create a dialogue here, and we couldn't do that without, understanding both sides of the discussion here. And so, yeah, we did focus groups and interviews and surveys just to really understand what the experiences were like out there, what were some ideas people had to improve them, and, how did they feel that maternity leaves were being impacted overall. So that's kind of the project, and it took us about 3 years, and in part because I had another 2 mat leaves during the project as well. So in a lot of ways, we were sort of learning and implementing and piloting some of the things that we were hearing from some of the other participants through my own experience too. So that was really cool in that we got to try some of the stuff, in real time as we were hearing about it.
Oh, that's great. And I do know some of this firsthand, but I'm excited to bring it out and share it with everyone out there listening. And I guess just before we kind of dig into that research about what you found and the results, why do you think, from your perspective as an expert on the topic, why is maternity leave such an important thing to consider in regards to career development?
Well, I mean, it impacts so many facets of a woman's life, but also her family's life and potentially her partner's as well, if she is partnered. So, I mean, it can impact finances, it can impact roles, division of roles and responsibilities in the house, and going back to the career as well. I found with my own experiences, certainly a greater want for work-life balance, flexibility. Kids, as we know, are expensive because statisticians are coming out with new stats all the time to tell us how much it costs to raise, a child until they're 18. And so it's a long-term investment and it's a long-term commitment. And you don't always know how you're going to feel about it when that child comes. And so how do you try and plan for something, that's always evolving. But nonetheless, it still requires your attention on it because it's just so impactful in so many regards.
Mm-hmm. And so for our international listeners, especially because your study really did focus on maternity leaves in Canada, I think it is important just to get some of the information around how maternity leaves work in Canada. I guess just in comparison to other countries, because of course I don't know how they work around the world in every country, but in Canada. Tell us a bit, Avra, just what are kind of the regulations, I guess. I don't know if there are certain provincial things or at least on a national level. How do maternity leaves work in Canada?
Yeah, there's certainly some provincial variation. You're right, Megan, which, it's kind of a bit too, to go into detail on that, we'd be spending a lot of time. But, overall, if you have worked at your employer typically for, sufficient hours up to that, and you become pregnant or adopt and you'd like to take maternity leave, then most employers will extend, a leave of up to 12 months. So sometimes it can be slightly less for someone who has adopted, and that's also an issue that was raised in the research as well. And that you can have a certain percentage of your income, then you can continue to receive a certain percentage of your income through employment insurance, although the consensus certainly is that it's not a lot in terms of what you're making, especially for someone who might be making anywhere from $40,000 or $50,000 a year or more. Certainly, receiving employment insurance so is not probably what one would hope in terms of what you were making before, although some organizations thankfully do top-ups. So that's, kind of what you're looking at in terms of maternity leave. Now, every country certainly is different. I know when I was in New Zealand, I think it was maybe 20 weeks or 30 weeks. We know that in the United States, certainly they've lagged behind in terms of providing leaves, but also paid leaves, which is really unfortunate because, like Canada, they're a very advanced Western nation. And so you're right, Megan, to say that a lot of countries certainly are different. And even within Canada, we found some differences provincially. So when we looked at Quebec, actually, we noted a lot more positive experiences over there in terms of employers being more flexible, in terms of more shared parental leaves. So again, even within our own country, there were some differences as well.
Oh, that's really, really interesting to hear the differences within the country because, of course, I knew about those national differences. A couple other things, too, that I know in Canada, the fact that when a woman takes that maternity leave, she, by law, can get or is entitled to her same position or a position of equal status and equal pay when she returns. And another one would be that we can have mothers or fathers taking that time off. The mother gets a first period of time and then I think it's like, I don't know if I'm right, Avra, around 35 weeks that the mother or the father can take off. So those are some other nuances in Canada. I don't know if they're present in other countries or not, but I guess it just lays a bit of foundation or groundwork for how it works here in Canada. Also interesting and sad, to be honest, that there is such a stark discrepancy between what happens around maternity leaves in Canada and in the States. And I think that's interesting probably for our international listeners who would assume, there's so many similarities between our countries that there is such a stark difference in the area of maternity leave. So I guess I just wanted to point that out. But Dev, I've been talking a lot, asking a lot of questions. Do you want to jump in, and do you have any questions for Avra?
Sure, a couple of things. Avra, this is fascinating because it's an area that, for myself especially, my knowledge is pretty small. But let me ask you sort of a hypothetical question. If a minister of labor for the federal government called you up and said, "Look, Avra, give me your 3 recommendations for specific change around mat leave policy or support for mat leave," what would you say to the minister?
Oh my goodness. I suppose in terms of a policy level, I mean, that was one thing that our research didn't spend as much time looking at. It was more so, I guess policy level at the organization as opposed to legislation. But, one thing that I certainly, the one thing that we hear to almost most women that are on maternity leave is a better financial support plan for when that woman is off, regardless if they're off for 3, 4 months, 12 months, or 18 months. It really doesn't matter the length of time. But to provide at least that, which can provide a person with a choice, right? Some people simply don't have a choice, at least that we heard in our research. So there were many, many women who wanted to go back because they really enjoyed their careers. There was others that had to go back because employment insurance wasn't sufficient, and they were putting their family at financial risk for taking a certain length of time off. So that, I think that would be one that really does warrant some discussion. And when you think about what is the impact of having women or parents in the workforce? I think that is something that's really interesting, that is fascinating to economists. So the International Monetary Fund did I won't say it's a formal study, but they issued a report a few years ago now that looked at if you had women in the labor force, what impact would that have on GDP? And in third world countries, certainly where there isn't as high participation, it was suggesting that it could increase a country's GDP by over 30%. And if you looked at a country in North America, I think it was something about 5 or 6%. Now that is huge. I can certainly hear what some of the responses to providing more money for parents on maternity leave might be, as to who's going to pay for that. But when you look at how that can fuel the economy in terms of people employing other people or other people producing goods and services, I think that makes a pretty good case for it as well. And, to think about also employing child care workers and other things like that. That's a really interesting discussion that we need much more dialogue at the government level. So that's one area, Deb. Sorry, that was a long explanation.
Keep it coming.
I think as well, another thing that we heard from women that we'd like to see perhaps at a larger policy level would be things around fertility, conception. So again, provinces were different, and we even saw some employers who were willing to financially support this for couples or for individuals who are undergoing fertility treatments. This can be very, very expensive. and it's not necessarily considered a health issue. So infertility, how do we bring this under as a health discussion as well? So I think that would be the second issue for a policy level. And then the third one, I'm not sure, what this could be. Perhaps I know that there's been some discussion around potentially extending the options for leave up to 18 months. And certainly I've heard through our research that many people would like this option. And I think that we have to be careful here, again, about assuming that everyone's going to want an 18-month leave. And we know that not everyone does. Not everyone wants to stay at home out of the workforce for that long. So just because it's an option doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is going to be taking it. But certainly it's nice to have choice. So I think those would be, three areas that I would like to see some further discussion and dialogue on, Dev.
That's excellent. And as you did the research and looking back on the research that you've done, do you see any kind of trends occurring, any kind of trend analysis that you did, which gives you cause for optimism as you look forward?
Well, one thing I think that was really interesting is that when we talked to women after birth or adoption, there was a lot of women who reported the same or increased career ambition before having children. And so I think that's an interesting perspective, because how do we capture that ambition? How do we harness that potential as an untapped labor force? Because we know, particularly when we're looking at an organization flow chart, we know that women tend not to be up as high as men are. And so how do we capture that ambition and creativity and intelligence and everything else that comes along with that? How do we get them more evenly distributed at an organization? Because we know there are other organizations such as Catalyst and McKinsey Group who are doing some fascinating research that suggests that when you have women in key positions within an organization, there's certainly a correlation in terms of organizational performance on a wide variety of metrics, including return on investments, improved social responsibility of the organization, improved corporate reputation, decreased turnover. Keeping in mind it's a correlation, not a causation. But again, it's still a really interesting thing to discuss more of.
Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the findings that from the research that you did. What were some other key findings, Avra? And I guess I'm interested in key findings from your perspective, as well as, I guess, either some things that turned out really similarly in terms of perspective of employer and employee, if they were similar or different. That's always interesting to me too.
Yeah, so one key area certainly would have been the impact on career development, promotion, career opportunities, generally speaking. So when we asked employees this question and we said, what impact does maternity leave have on your own career and development, opportunities, promotion, so on and so forth, about 38% of women said it had a negative impact on their career development. However, when we asked the same question to employers, 15% said it had a negative impact. So, a difference of 38 to 15. And I think even if we look at the employee group, that 38%, I think it's a low number. Because there are situations that we as women aren't always aware of about how having a maternity leave may have been impactful to us, because we simply weren't in the room when particular conversations were happening. So while those stats are perceptions, that's one thing that we have to keep in mind. So I wonder, especially on the employee side, if it actually might be a little bit higher. But 38 and 15%, that's a significant difference. So, why do the employers think only 15% think it has a negative impact, but yet employees are saying, 38% are saying, no, it does have a negative impact? How do we get to a closer consensus or agreement about the impacts it does have?
Mm-hmm. And even just that stat in and of itself, the gravity of over 1 in 3 women in Canada feeling that having a mat leave has a detrimental effect on their career progression is crazy. And I think this is such a timely topic. It has been for a number of years, but around everything with the marches going on around the world around women's rights, this is crazy. In Canada, again, I can't speak for every country in the world, women and men are both working almost, not quite to equal amounts, but almost equal amounts. And, if I look, being a millennial, if I look into the past, families could support themselves on a single income. And usually that breadwinner was the male. And we've been shifting those numbers so significantly over the course of the last, I don't know how many years, but this is something that this topic and this information and hearing how women perceive this to be such a detrimental part of or impact on their career, yet, women want to have children. And like you're saying, women who have children a lot of the time report even higher levels of ambition. It's just I guess it's boggling to my brain a little bit, but are there, go ahead, Avra.
Well, I was just going to say, that ambition piece, just it really sticks out for me, and I haven't looked at the stats recently, but, another thing that we heard from a lot of women that we spoke to was that they went and started their own businesses, either because they couldn't get what they were looking for at the employer, they were tired of having the same discussions and getting nowhere, or just that increased ambition took over and it's like, I'm going to do my own thing. And when we look at all the women that we know who have been in those positions that have started their own companies and their own organizations, and perhaps they've gone on to employ other people as well, I mean, wow, that's, what a great accomplishment. And again, what is the impact to Canada's economy and certainly its competitiveness on a global scale to have people, who, take the bull by the horns and go ahead and do their own thing. It's just, there's more people out there, I think, that could also be doing that, but don't have the supports to do it as well. So again, for those reasons, I think we need to be capitalizing on that increased ambition. And how do we support these women and their families to really, do what it is that they want and to contribute to society in a positive and meaningful way?
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting now with more and more organizations. I'm not sure if this is coming down at a government level at all, or if it really just is organization by organization. But what I'm hearing is, there's more and more, we're trying to get more equal numbers of women into those director roles or those partner roles or those higher level C-suite roles across the organization. And what I'm hearing from you about the number of women who seem to go entrepreneurial or start their own venture after having a child, I've heard the phrase a leaking pipeline. And that's what it sounds like from what you're describing, Avra, is there are so many intelligent, ambitious, hardworking women, and because they're not getting their needs met, they move on and they leave the organization. So it's not helping or supporting that problem either of equalizing that level of talent higher up in the organization.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I know, certainly in other countries, particularly in Scandinavian countries where they've implemented quota systems for, women on boards and things like that. Canada doesn't have anything like that, although I think in 2016 the Securities Commission implemented a comply or explain legislation for publicly listed companies where they have to explain their board representation and, why is it not 30% or higher. And, those reports are released to shareholders and other important people. However, it doesn't really have the teeth sometimes in terms of really enacting change that needs to happen at those higher levels.
So, Avra, I imagine that demographically speaking, or at least from a cohort in age groups and so on, mat leave is going to be more of an issue for younger generation women of a particular age versus older generations. But did your research show you anything in the way of developments generationally that caused you concern or any kind of worry as you looked at the shift into more and more millennials in the workplace and how employers' attitudes as well as implementations of maternity or mat leave policy could affect them versus previous generations?
Yeah, good question. We did delve in slightly to demographics, and I'll say slightly because certainly, we can take any age group or cultural group and maternity leave, and that's a study on its own. So, while we wanted to look into it, our project certainly couldn't do justice to that. But, to give you an example, we did look at first-time moms 40 and over, as well as younger mums, so between the ages of 20 and 25. And it was interesting, and I also see this in my practice as well with young women. They're not even partnered. Okay, they're not married. They're not partnered. They don't know their career direction, and they're already stressing out about what their career would look like and should they consider something that will allow them to be a working mom. So even before they have children or even partnered, there's already a lot of anxiety around it. And, I think that's really important to note is that these young people are already concerned about something that they're not even experiencing. And I think that will be, certainly a key edge for employers who are listening is how do we, retain these people? How do we attract them? And what are some ways that we can be mindful that these are important issues, not just for women, but also we're seeing it much, much more for men as well. That, they want to be certain types of dads, and that they want to be able to play increased roles in their child's lives as well as maintaining a career. And so how can they do that? And what can organizations do differently to attract and retain these workers? And, these are going to be knowledge workers. They're going to be experienced people on all kinds of levels. So it's really about being proactive and hearing some of the messaging and even anxieties that they're expressing now around this issue.
And Debra, as we look at the economy worldwide, with the new American president, the potential isolationist policies and the effect on the global sort of economy that is linked, all throughout the world. Do you see any kind of a tension between the hope for more in the way of robust mat leave policy or mat leave approaches in organizations and economic realities that may look like they're driving towards a more dire marketplace and employment environment for people today?
Well, I think, that's a tough question to answer because oftentimes when we look at, how do we attract and retain these people, we often look at, what is the cost going to be and what's our return on investment? And one of the things that we looked at in our research was that there's many, many things that employers can be doing for little to no cost to be employers of choice, for all types of Canadians, not just parents, because many of the things that we talk about in our guidebooks that we publish can apply to not just moms, not just dads, but to all employees. And so, I think I'm sort of coming away a little bit from your question, but I think it's employees both understanding where their strengths are, being proactive, not just waiting around for recruiters to find them, to be proactive and to do career counseling, to find out what they're interested in so that they're being effective and efficient with their time. And for employers to really understand it's not just about top-ups, even though I mentioned that earlier in the show, that there's many, many other things that employers can be doing to attract and retain talent. And this is, super important because currently in Alberta especially, we have high unemployment rates, particularly more so in the past than we've had, largely in part due to the price of oil and natural gas being where it's at. But we can be more effective in how we're using our population and how we attract and engage and retain them. And certainly I'm not really sure how things are going to play out in the U.S. and how that might impact us. Maybe Canada will take more of the people that the Americans are not letting in. And if that's the case, then we have to be even more strategic about career decisions that we're going to be making as individuals.
And so what are some specific things, Avra, that organizations or employers can do to, I guess, retain new mothers or even support them to have a better, more successful maternity leave transition? I don't know if you have specific examples from anyone that you interviewed or from any of the organizations you interviewed, or just stemming from the results. Are there things that you would recommend?
Absolutely. So the biggest thing that we saw actually among both employees and employers around this was not making an assumption about what your employer might say if you ask for flexible time off, or how your employer is going to react when you announce your intention to adopt or you're pregnant, as well as for employers not to assume that because someone is pregnant or adopting, that they're not going to come back to work, that they're going to take 12 or 18 months off, and that they're going to want part-time work when they get back. Not everyone wants that. So it's about not having assumptions and creating a dialogue instead around this transition, but also just maintaining good career dialogues as well, regardless if you are pregnant or parenting or adopting, right? Just a good career dialogue ongoing. So that certainly would be one. Another one that we found to be really, really important in terms of facilitating maternity leave career transitions was having a communication plan in place. And this is to be built collaboratively between the employer prior to leave, and it can be updated during your leave. But essentially it outlines what type of information would you like to have on your leave? So if your intention is to leave for 6 or 8 or 12 months, would you like to know about training opportunities? Would you like to know about openings and positions, promotions, those types of things? And who's going to be responsible for communicating that type of information to you, and in what type of time frame? Because something like that could be quite time sensitive. And we found that having an effective communication plan in place created an increased sense of loyalty among employees to the employer. It helped communicate information so that upon their return, it wasn't sort of like an overload in terms of, okay, where is everybody and what role are they in and how come I didn't know about that? So it can just really help minimize any of the stress and miscommunications of returning back after maternity leave. So certainly those two are really important and effective strategies. The last one, I'll mention too, and there's just so many, Megan, having a return to work plan in place as well. And again, this is, what role might you come back to? What type of schedule would you like to come back to? So all of these options that I'm talking about really need to be built around communication, transparency, ongoing career dialogue, not making assumptions. And so all of those strategies, I think, are underpinned by those philosophies.
And so when you're sharing that, Ava, in certain ways to me, and maybe again, it's because of the field that I work in and the work that I do, but it seems so obvious and so much common sense and just clear
right?
things. Don't make assumptions, communicate, have a plan. And so to me, I guess, and I don't know if you have an answer for this or if any of the organizations that you interviewed through the research spoke to this, but for the organizations out there that aren't doing these things, why, even in terms of the money you're talking about, these aren't high cost things. And in the end, they can end up saving an organization so much money because in retaining talent, it means you don't have to hire and train new talent, which we know is quite costly. So why aren't these things already being done kind of across the board?
I agree, right? So low effort, low cost, but high value on the end. So why aren't people doing it? Well, potentially a couple of reasons. I mean, one, we are all humans, and we tend to be more reactive as opposed to proactive, right? So if you go to the doctor and the doctor's saying, well, you could stand to lose a few pounds, and you could be at risk for developing type 2 diabetes, that probably will be, unfortunately, more impactful on someone than just wanting to maintain good health at the outset. So certainly, yeah, we can be a little bit more reactive than we probably hope to. I think the other thing too is that, unfortunately, there's still some taboo and stigma with this discussion. And so, people don't always know how to approach this conversation from the employee and employer perspective. And that was, again, another reason why we wanted to create these resources is to equip people to have a dialogue, because there is a lot of, can I have this conversation? Do they look pregnant? I know they're pregnant. What can I say or what should I not say? And so that's another issue as well that is impacting the development in this area. And then finally, I think, another thing that could be impacting it, particularly more so from the employer side, is that oftentimes when we asked employers, how well do you think you're handling this process? Most employers felt that they were actually doing a pretty good job about it, which was surprising to us, because certainly we were hearing the opposite from employees. And so, we thought, okay, well, what can explain this? And what we sort of came away with is that many employers are certainly doing a good job of handling this process from sometimes a policy and procedure process. So, I've put in the paperwork. I've sort of ticked the boxes on things like that, but I haven't gone more than that to engage this person as an employee, as a potential resource to my organization. And so we really have to get past the issue of maternity leave, career transition being simply just a policy-based transition. It's really about employee engagement, employee development, employee retention, and I think that's an important distinction that we need to talk more about.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's where it does come down more and more to that organization by organization level, because the policy is something that could be mandated provincially or federally, but really those conversations between HR and the employee or manager and the employee, it's going to differ in what exactly that looks like, because every organization is structured differently. I think you hit on some really useful information and I guess suggestions about what can be done. If I were to turn and ask specifically about what can women do, really concretely, are there any things that you would suggest women do or stop doing in the way that they are handling their own maternity leaves?
Well, going back to the first one, which, I won't sort of go over again in detail, but, not making assumptions about how you're going to feel or what your employer may or may not say. I think, you have to look at the information that's in front of you and deal with it certainly as it comes. I think the other one that's really important is really understanding that you have a role in your own career development, that it's not based solely in the organization's responsibility to be managing your career, regardless if you're a parent or not. So what can you be doing differently to take control and ownership of your career, regardless of what stage you're at? I think that's, certainly a significant one. Certainly, sometimes engaging in career counseling can be really helpful, Megan, as we both know, in terms of where do my interests lie, what does my personality say about what careers might be a fit for me? And where do my values, how do my values fit into career decision-making? Because that was certainly one, when we talked to a lot of women, there seemed to be a lot of values-based career decision-making happening, whether it was around, flexibility, working for themselves, wanting to make more money, being closer to family, things like that. So I think, those are some important things to be thinking about for yourself. Also looking for information, seeing what other people are doing, but also, again, you're going to have your own unique experience. So just because someone else handled their leave in a particular way and it seemed to work for them, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the same outcomes. We're all different people. We all have access to different resources, partners, no partners. And so, again, those are all factors that can impact your own career decision-making. So just appreciating the uniqueness of yourself.
So, Avra, I'm going to give you an opportunity to open up and just talk freely and without interruption for the next sort of 5 to 10 minutes. So a couple of questions.
Great.
Way to put her on the spot, Deb.
So what if
5 or 10 minutes? I don't have anything prepared here, Deb. What are you doing?
Don't worry. It'll be something that's close to your heart. So one question that I want to ask you is, what do you hope the impact of the research that you've put so much of yourself into is going to actually be? That's one. And then the other thing is, if we were to ask you to sort of sum up some of the key things that you would want women who are contemplating mat leave to reflect on, what would those things be? And that's how we'll end the show today.
Okay, wow, goodness gracious. Yeah, talk about being on the spot. Thanks, Dev. I thought I was doing well up until now. I suppose my hope for the work that we've done, the research that we've done, is for it to become less taboo. Dare I say that we would even need such resources anymore, because these types of dialogues are so ingrained in the fabric of each and every organization. I mean, that would be ideal, although maybe our publisher, our funder, and the people who worked on the project wouldn't really appreciate that. But I think that, that is the ultimate goal, is that we don't need a guidebook like this, because these are conversations that happen organically, and that people willingly engage in, and that people are not afraid to have, and that career development for moms and dads is treated in its unique way, just like career development would be for any employee within an organization. I suppose my second hope as well overall is just, to have more career-focused conversations in our own lives as well as in the workplace. Having worked with so many different types of clients in various stages, it's really impactful to see the consequences and impact career decision making has on a person, including their physical health, their mental health, their social health, their relationships, so on and so forth. So I think those would be certainly my biggest hopes. In terms of what, women can be reflecting on, I would say, what is your definition of success? What is your own definition of career success? And try and forget what you think you know about career success at a societal level, because if you're using someone else's measuring stick to create your own measure of success, it's probably not going to work out very, very well for you. And to be reflecting on that when your circumstances change, what has changed for you? Because career development certainly is an ongoing process. It's developmental in nature. And so, like I had mentioned before, how have your interests changed? How have your values changed? Your beliefs about yourself, the world of work, so on and so forth. So just really always processing those things, especially every time there's a significant change in your life, whether it's a relationship beginning, ending, a birth, a loss of life, a change in health or financial status. These are key points in everyone's lives that can often impact career decisions we make and don't make. And so to end, that's what I would like people to reflect on.
Well, I think that's great advice, Avra. I think it's so clear and, again, so simple, but not commonplace. And it does require that level of insight for someone to really reflect on their values, what's important to them, and what career success really means to them. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to let Dev close off the show, but before I do that, I just wanted to kind of state it clearly for our listeners out there. We haven't touched on it, or I don't think we've stated it directly, but the research that Avra led is called the Making It Work study, and it can be found on the Canada Career Counselling website. So for any women or even husbands or partners out there who are hearing this show tonight, or employers that are out there, that is where you can find more information about the study and the research and the two guides that Avra alluded to. So there is a guide specifically for employers and a guide for employees. So those could be great resources for anyone out there listening. So that's just what I wanted to jump in there and say before Dev closes.
Avra, thank you so much for being with us. I think that this is an area that really has not been talked about enough in the career world. And to be able to have the privilege of listening to sort of the cream of your study and some of the key issues that you've inquired into and really done some in-depth reflection on, I think has been worth it for us. And I'm sure worth it for many of the people who listen to us all around the world as we do this particular program. So thank you from us both and from our listeners for what you shared with us today.
Happy to do so. Thank you so much for allowing me to come on and have this conversation and hopefully encourage other people to have some dialogues elsewhere.
Thank you. Listeners, so that's it for this particular program. And from Megan and I, we hope that you have a wonderful week. And we look forward to being with you again next week on a completely different note and a completely different subject. And at that point in time, we hope that you'll find material as fascinating and useful to your career as what we listened to with Avra this evening. All the very best from Toronto, Canada. Good night.
The career discussion doesn't stop here. For more information about how to transform your career, visit CanadaCareerCounseling.com. And remember to tune in next Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Bold Radio Station for the next episode of Career Cravings.